are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
And we are jumping right into a huge topic today.
Huge is the right word. We're tackling a subject that every single person listening has gone through, usually for 12, maybe 16 years of their life. But, and this is the real kicker, how many of us ever stop to define what it is? We're talking about education.
It's the water we all swim in, isn't it? You go to school, you get grades, you get a degree, but the fundamental question, what is this for? We rarely ask it.
Is it just about downloading information, getting a job?
Or is it something else entirely?
Exactly. And to help us get some answers, we're not looking at a modern study. We are going way back. We're diving into Mortimer Adler's essay on education from the Syntopicon.
And that word Syntopicon, it sounds a little bit like a science fiction movie.
It does. So let's be clear, this isn't one single text we're reviewing. Adler's essay is more like a masterclass. He read the entire great books of the Western world. We're talking Plato, Aquinas, Rousseau, Adam Smith. And he synthesized what they all said about this one topic.
He's our guide through about 2,500 years of debate. And what he finds is that education is not a solved problem. He calls it a perennial practical problem.
That phrase is so important. Perennial. It means it never goes away.
Never. Every generation has to wrestle with it because it's all tangled up with human nature, with politics, with economics, everything.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore that massive, great conversation. Are we trying to make a good worker, or are we trying to form a good human being?
Because those two goals are often not the same thing. In fact, they can be in direct conflict.
So let's jump in. The very first distinction Adler makes is probably the most important one. He splits the entire concept into two buckets: liberal education and servile training.
And that word servile, it's a very loaded term.
It sounds heavy.
It is. It comes from servant or even slave. Servile training is any learning that's designed to make a person a means to an end. You're being trained to be a tool, a function, a specific type of employee. The value isn't in you, the person.
The value is in what you can produce.
Exactly, the output.
So if I learn to code, but only so I can build an app for my boss, that would technically be...
In the classical definition, yes. That's servile training. You are sharpening yourself into a utility for someone else.
Okay, that's the cog in the machine model.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? What's liberal education? And I'm guessing this has nothing to do with modern politics.
Nothing at all. Liberal comes from the Latin word libera, for free. Liberal education is about treating a human being as an end in themselves. It's not about your economic output. It's about cultivating what Adler calls the excellence of free human beings.
Learning how to think, how to reason.
How to judge, how to see beauty, how to be a fully realized person.
This feels so relevant. We always hear the word vocation, right? We have vocational schools. But you're saying there's a huge irony there.
It's a total flip of the original meaning. Vocation used to mean a calling, a high moral duty to become the best human you could be. It was about who you are.
And now?
Now, vocational education just means job prep. It's become another term for servile training. We've taken this profound word about a higher calling and reduced it to employment.
That is a massive mental shift for a whole society to make. It implies our main purpose is to be employable, not to be a person.
And Adler says a true liberal education isn't just about reading either. He breaks it down into three parts.
Okay.
The physical, the moral, and the intellectual.
Wait, the physical. So gym class is actually part of this grand tradition.
It should be. The Greeks called it gymnastic, training the body to be a healthy instrument for the mind. Then there's moral education, which is about building character, forming habits, and finally, the intellectual, which is the knowledge part.
And if you just focus on the intellectual part, the IQ points.
But you neglect the moral or the physical, you don't get a whole person. You might just get a very clever monster.
A clever monster. That's a chilling thought. Okay, so this whole debate obviously didn't start with us. Adler sends us back to the beginning, back to Plato.
You have to start with Plato. He's the first one to really build a whole system around it. For him, education was incredibly high stakes. It wasn't about facts and figures. It was about turning the soul.
Turning it toward what?
Toward reality itself. Think of his allegory of the cave. Everyone's chained up, watching shadows, thinking that's life.
Right.
Education's the brutal process of being dragged out of that darkness and into the sunlight of truth. It's a liberation.
It sounds beautiful. But there's always a catch with Plato, isn't there? This isn't really about individual freedom.
Not at all, and that's the tension. Plato's vision is deeply authoritarian. In the Republic, education's primary purpose is to serve the state. It's about creating the guardians.
The ruling class.
Right. You're educated to be wise and good, sure, but specifically so you can run the government and protect the city. Adler quotes Plato saying the goal is to make men who will conquer their enemies in battle.
So you escape the cave, see the truth, and your reward is getting handed a sword to defend the state.
Precisely. The individual exists for the collective. And that's the opening. His most famous student, Aristotle, walks right through.
Okay, so Aristotle pushes back.
He does. He's much more practical. He makes this brilliant distinction between intellectual virtue and moral virtue.
Let's break that down because I think we mix those up all the time. We think being smart means being good.
And Aristotle says no. Intellectual virtue, being good at math, knowing history, that comes from instruction. You can learn that from a teacher. But moral virtue, things like courage, kindness, self-control, you can't get those from a lecture.
So reading a book called How to Be Brave won't actually make me brave.
Not a chance. Aristotle says moral virtue is only acquired through habit. You become brave by repeatedly doing brave things. You become just by practicing justice over and over.
This was a direct shot at Socrates, wasn't it? Socrates thought that if you just knew what was right, you'd do it.
Yes, the idea that knowledge equals virtue. Aristotle saw the flaw in that. I mean, we all know we should eat better, but
the donut is right there.
the donut is right there. You can know the right thing and still choose the wrong thing. That's why you need practice. You need habituation, not just information.
And Aristotle also connects this directly to politics, saying the education system has to reflect the government.
Absolutely. A democracy, he argues, needs to educate its people to be democrats. You have to mold the citizen for the Constitution. You can't maintain a free society by training people to be obedient subjects.
Which feels more relevant now than ever. You have to actively teach citizenship.
It has to be taught.
Okay, let's fast forward. We're leaving the ancient world of the soul and the state, and we're entering the Middle Ages. The Roman Empire is gone. The church is the main institution. What happens to education?
The center of gravity shifts entirely. Now, it's not about serving the state, it's about serving God. The ultimate goal becomes theological. But in this period, we get one of the most powerful metaphors for teaching ever from St. Thomas Aquinas.
This part of the essay was my favorite. He compares teaching not to construction, but to medicine and agriculture.
It's a profound insight. He calls teaching a cooperative art. Think about it. When you break a bone, does the doctor actively fuse the bone back together?
No. The doctor just sets it in place. My body does the actual healing.
Exactly. The doctor sits in nature. They create the right conditions for the body to heal itself. Aquinas says a teacher is the same. They're like a farmer. A farmer can't force a seed to grow.
They can just provide good soil, water, and sunlight.
Right. They create the conditions, but the growth comes from an internal power within the seed itself.
So the teacher isn't a factory worker assembling a student. They're a gardener.
Perfectly put. And the student isn't a passive, empty vessel. Aquinas says real learning comes from an interior light inside the student. If that light isn't on, no amount of lecturing or data dumping will work.
That is so respectful of the learner. It gives them all the agency.
It does. It says the student is the primary cause of their own learning.
That idea of an interior light is a perfect place to pause for a second. This feels like the perfect time for a mindful moment.
It does.
Speaking of reflection and finding that interior light, I want to quickly mention the Mindful Moments YouTube channel. That's our channel. We create AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques over there. It's all about inspiring reflection and rational thought, just like we're doing here. So if this is your kind of conversation, you'll feel right at home. Go check it out.
Absolutely. Rational thought is the goal.
Okay, so we're back to the timeline. We're moving out of the Middle Ages. The interior light is shining. But now we hit the modern period, and the focus shifts again. It moves away from God and the state and lands squarely on the individual. And we meet Montaigne.
Ah, Montaigne. He feels like such a modern voice. He was writing in the 1500s and was just so tired of the stuffy, pretentious education of his day. He hated what he called pedantic education.
Just memorizing facts to sound smart.
Exactly. Learning quotes without understanding them. He had that great line, he'd rather have a well-made head than a well-filled one.
It's about judgment, not just data.
Practical wisdom, knowing how to live, not just knowing what others have said. But then we get to Rousseau, and it all gets much more complicated.
Rousseau is all about freedom, the noble savage, right? Like kids be kids.
That's one side of him, yes. In his book, Emile, he argues for a natural education. Let the child learn from the world. Don't impose society's rules on them. Let them learn from consequences.
But Adler points out a massive contradiction in his work.
A huge one. Because while Rousseau, the educator, wants this free, autonomous individual, Rousseau, the political theorist, wants total submission to the state.
How does that work?
It's a paradox. He writes about the general will of the people, and he believes the ideal citizen must be completely absorbed into that collective will. He actually argues that state education should be a form of civic indoctrination.
Indoctrination is a very strong word.
But it's his idea. He wanted children to be taught to love their country above all else, to the point where their individual identity almost disappears. He wanted to denature the citizen, strip away their self-interest for the good of the whole.
So it's this weird combination of total freedom for the child and total control for the citizen.
A very strange mix. And then the Industrial Revolution changes the conversation yet again. Suddenly, it's not about the soul or God or even the state. It becomes about the economy.
And this is where Adam Smith comes in. We think of him as the father of capitalism, but he has this incredible warning for us.
A chilling warning. It's about his famous idea of the division of labor.
The pin factory.
The pin factory. Instead of one person making a whole pin, 10 people each do one tiny step. One cuts the wire, one sharpens the point. It's incredibly efficient.
Production goes through the roof.
The economy booms. But Smith asks a terrifying question. What happens to the mind of the person who spends his entire life doing nothing but sharpening the point of a pin?
It must be crushing.
Smith says it makes you stupid. He warns of intellectual torpor. He says the person becomes incapable of rational conversation, incapable of generous feeling, incapable of just judgment.
Wait a minute. Adam Smith, the champion of the free market, is arguing that industrial capitalism can destroy the human mind.
He is. He's admitting that the engine of wealth creation is also an engine of mental decay. It's devastating for the individual.
So what's his solution?
Universal education. But, and this is the whole point, not education to make you a better pin sharpener.
Because that would just be more servile training.
Precisely. Smith wants education to save your humanity from your job. He says even the poorest person deserves to have their mind kept alive, to be a thinking person, to preserve their dignity against the soul-crushing nature of their work.
That's maybe the strongest case for liberal education we've heard yet. It's a form of self-defense for the mind.
It prevents the economy from turning human beings into livestock.
But that creates a new problem. If everyone needs an education, who pays for it? The government. And if the government pays, the government controls. Which brings us to John Stuart Mill.
And Mill is terrified of this. He's a huge defender of liberty, and he sees state-run education as a potential nightmare. He feared that if the government designs the curriculum and hires all the teachers, they'll just mold everyone to be exactly the same.
A despotism over the mind, he called it.
Yes. A mere contrivance for molding people to be exactly like one another. If everyone is taught to think the same way, genuine freedom is impossible.
It sounds like he's predicting our debates about standardized testing.
He would have despised it, but his solution was clever. He said the state should compel education, make it mandatory, and the state should pay for it for those who can't afford it. But, he argued, the state should not be the only provider.
He wanted a marketplace of ideas.
He wanted competing experiments, a diversity of schools and philosophies to keep standards high and to keep thought free.
So looking at this whole journey, Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, Rousseau, Smith, Mill, it feels like we haven't solved a single thing. We're still arguing about all of it.
And that's exactly Adler's conclusion. These are perennial problems, individual versus state, liberal versus servile. They don't have a final answer. They are tensions we have to live with and constantly renegotiate.
That could feel a little depressing that we're stuck in a loop. But Adler sees it differently.
He does. He says the debate is the education. His final point is that the great books themselves are a program for adult education. Learning isn't something that stops at graduation.
You don't graduate from being a person.
Never. Adler describes Western thought as this incredible, long, continuing conversation. Plato is arguing with Rousseau, Aristotle is talking to Aquinas, and they are all talking to us.
And our job isn't to just memorize their answers. It's to join the conversation.
That's it. The goal of a liberal education is to earn your seat at that table, to keep that interior light burning so you can be a free human being, not just a well-trained tool. That's what it's all for.
So what does this mean for someone listening now? Someone who feels that intellectual torpor that Adam Smith described?
It means you have a choice. You can decide that your education is not over. You can pick up an essay like this. You can join the conversation. You can ask why.
You can ask yourself, am I building my humanity or just sharpening a skill for the market? Because the world will always want you to be a tool.
It's up to you to insist on being a person.
That is the perfect thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Mortimer Adler's timeless essay. If you want to keep that interior light burning, we can help. Click the link on screen for more on this and other essay subjects. Please subscribe, share, and if you're so inclined, purchase via the link. Above all, think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.